I never thought a truck would destroy my life, but when I pulled into my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, with my brand new Ford F-150 in what the dealership called Velocity Blue, I had no idea I was about to enter the most absurd legal battle of my entire existence. My name is Stephen Baxter. I'm a 34-year-old software engineer, and I was about to learn that the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association had way too much time on their hands. The truck was beautiful. I'd saved for 2 years to afford it, trading in my old sedan for something that could handle the camping trips I'd been planning with my buddies. The color caught my eye immediately at the dealership, this gorgeous deep blue that shimmered in the Arizona sun. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon, drove it home with the windows down, and parked it right in front of my house with the kind of pride only a first-time truck owner can understand. Friday morning, I woke up to find a bright orange envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I grabbed my coffee and walked outside in my pajama pants, figuring it was some advertisement or maybe a notice about street cleaning. Instead, I found a formal violation notice from the Sunset Ridge HOA, signed by none other than Patricia Vandermeer, the HOA president who'd made it her personal mission to make everyone's lives miserable since she'd been elected 6 months ago. The notice stated that my vehicle was in violation of Section 732 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently stipulated that all vehicles parked in driveways or visible from the street must be in approved neutral or earth tone colors, including but not limited to white, black, gray, silver, beige, tan, or approved shades of blue, as determined by the Architectural Review Committee. My truck, according to Patricia's typed-up complaint, was not an approved shade of blue, and therefore constituted a violation subject to a fine of $100 per day until the violation was corrected. I read the notice 3 times, convinced it was a joke. My truck was blue. The bylaws said blue was acceptable. How could there be a wrong shade of blue? I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 5 years. "They're messing with you," Marcus said immediately. "Patricia's been on a rampage lately. She fined the Hendersons because their mailbox was 2 inches too tall." 2 inches, Stephen. But this is insane. It's a factory color from Ford. It's not like I painted it neon or something. Doesn't matter to her. She's got this whole binder of what she considers acceptable. I'd go talk to her if I were you, but fair warning, she's not reasonable. I decided to handle it professionally. I worked from home that day, and during my lunch break, I drove over to Patricia's house, which was exactly 4 streets over and looked like something out of a magazine spread. Perfect lawn, perfect flowers, perfect shutters that were probably the exact approved shade of whatever color shutters were supposed to be. Patricia answered the door wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and pearls, actual pearls, at 1 in the afternoon on a Friday. She was probably in her mid-50s with hair that had been dyed and styled within an inch of its life, and she looked at me like I'd just tracked mud across her foyer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of false politeness that immediately put me on edge. "Hi, I'm Stephen Baxter from Saguaro Lane. I got this violation notice about my truck, and I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake. Your vehicle is in clear violation of the community standards, but the bylaws say blue is acceptable. My truck is blue. It's literally called Velocity Blue. It's a standard Ford color." Patricia's expression hardened. "The bylaws specify approved shades of blue. Your vehicle is not an approved shade. It's too bright, too flashy. This is a family community, Mr. Baxter, and we have standards. It's a truck. It's blue." "I don't understand what the problem is. The problem is that you're in violation. You have 3 options. Repaint the vehicle to an approved color, park it in your garage where it's not visible from the street, or remove it from the property entirely. You have 7 days to comply, after which the fines will begin accumulating at $100 per day. I don't have a garage. It's a carport, and the truck doesn't fit under it. And I'm not repainting a brand new truck because you don't like the shade. Then I suggest you find alternative parking arrangements." "Good day, Mr. Baxter." She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a solid 10 seconds trying to process what had just happened. This woman was actually serious. She was going to fine me $100 a day because my truck was the wrong shade of blue. I went home and did what any reasonable person would do. I dug out my copy of the HOA bylaws, all 78 pages of mind-numbing legalese, and started reading. Section 732 did indeed mention vehicle colors, but the language was vague at best. It mentioned approved shades of blue, but nowhere in the entire document could I find a definition of what constituted an approved shade versus an unapproved one. There was no color chart, no paint codes, no reference guide whatsoever. By Monday morning, when the 7-day deadline started ticking down, I'd compiled a list of every blue vehicle in the neighborhood. I drove around with my phone, taking photos. There was a navy blue Honda Civic 2 streets over, a light blue Toyota Camry on Desert Bloom Drive, a royal blue Jeep Cherokee parked right across from Patricia's house. I counted 12 blue vehicles total, all in different shades, none of which had violation notices on their windshields. I printed everything out, put it in a folder, and requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. Arizona law required HOAs to provide homeowners with an opportunity to contest violations before imposing fines, and I was going to use every legal avenue available. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center, a beige stucco building that hosted everything from yoga classes to bingo nights. I arrived 15 minutes early with my folder of evidence, wearing a button-down shirt and slacks because I figured it couldn't hurt to look professional. The board consisted of 5 people: Patricia as president, a nervous-looking guy named Gerald Thompson as treasurer, a woman named Susan Chen as secretary, and 2 at-large members whose names I couldn't remember. They sat behind a folding table at the front of the room while I took a seat in the audience area, which was empty except for me and an elderly woman who I think just showed up because she was bored. Patricia called the meeting to order with all the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice, reading through minutes and budget reports before finally getting to my violation hearing. She asked me to come forward and state my case. I approached the table, set down my folder, and took a breath. Thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm here to contest the violation notice I received regarding my vehicle. I believe this violation is not only unjustified but is also being applied inconsistently across the community. I opened the folder and pulled out the photos. These are 12 blue vehicles currently parked in our neighborhood, all in different shades of blue. None of them have received violation notices. My truck is blue. It's a factory color from a major automotive manufacturer, and I believe it falls well within the parameters of what should be considered acceptable. Patricia didn't even look at the photos. Those vehicles are in approved shades of blue. Yours is not. Can you show me where in the bylaws it defines what an approved shade is? Because I've read the entire document and there's no specification. The Architectural Review Committee has discretion to determine what is and is not appropriate for our community's aesthetic standards, but there's no committee meeting minutes, no color chart, no objective standard being applied. How am I supposed to know what's approved if there's no clear guideline? Gerald, the treasurer, cleared his throat. If I may, I actually think Mr. Baxter has a point. I've looked at his truck, and it seems like a normal blue to me. Patricia shot him a look that could have frozen lava. The committee has made its determination. What committee? I pressed. When did they meet? Who are the members? Where are the records? The Architectural Review Committee consists of the HOA president and 2 appointed members who review issues as they arise. So you're the committee? You're telling me that you alone get to decide what shade of blue is acceptable, with no oversight, no written standards, and no consistency. Mr. Baxter, I've been part of this community for 15 years. I know what's appropriate and what's not. Your vehicle is flashy and inappropriate, and that's final. Susan, the secretary, shuffled some papers. Patricia, maybe we should table this and actually review the color standards. If there's no clear definition, it might be worth updating the bylaws to be more specific. We're not tabling anything. Mr. Baxter is in violation. The fine schedule will proceed as outlined in the notice. This hearing is concluded. I felt my face getting hot. This is ridiculous. You can't just make up rules as you go along. Watch your tone, Mr. Baxter. You're in violation of community standards, and you will comply or face the financial consequences. Good evening. I left the community center feeling like I'd just been mugged. The whole thing was a kangaroo court, and Patricia had no intention of being reasonable. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, my supposedly offensive blue truck, and called the one person I knew who might be able to help. David Carmichael was a lawyer who'd gone to college with my older brother. He specialized in real estate law, which included HOA disputes, and he'd always told me to call if I ever needed anything. I'd never imagined I'd need a lawyer to defend the color of my truck, but here we were. David answered on the 3rd ring. Stephen, what's going on? I explained the whole situation, from the violation notice to the sham hearing to Patricia's absolute refusal to be reasonable. I could hear him trying not to laugh. Let me get this straight. They're fining you because your truck is the wrong shade of blue? Yes. And they can't define what the right shade is. Correct. Stephen, this might be the dumbest case I've ever heard. And I once represented a guy whose HOA tried to fine him because his dog was the wrong breed, even though the dog was clearly the breed they said was allowed. So can you help me? Oh, I can definitely help you. This is going to be fun. Can you come by my office tomorrow? Bring all the documentation you have, including the bylaws, the violation notice, and those photos you took. Friday afternoon, I met David at his office in downtown Scottsdale. He was in his early 40s, with graying hair, and the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from winning more cases than you lose. His office was cluttered with case files and law books, and he had a photo of his wife and 2 kids on his desk next to a coffee mug that said, "World's Most Adequate Lawyer." We spread everything out on his conference table, and he spent 30 minutes reading through the bylaws and my documentation. Every few minutes, he'd shake his head or mutter something under his breath. Finally, he looked up. Okay, here's the situation. Arizona has pretty specific laws about HOA enforcement. They can't impose fines without clear written standards, and those standards have to be applied consistently. What they're doing here is textbook arbitrary and capricious enforcement. So I can fight this? You can absolutely fight this. In fact, I think you should. This kind of behavior from HOAs needs to be checked, or they just keep getting worse. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send them a letter demanding they cease all collection activities pending resolution of this dispute. Second, I'm going to request all Architectural Review Committee records, meeting minutes, and any documentation regarding color standards. Third, if they don't back down, we're going to file suit in small claims court for harassment and improper enforcement. How much is this going to cost me? David leaned back in his chair. Tell you what, this is so absurd that I'll take it on contingency. If we win, they pay my fees. If we lose, which we won't, you don't owe me anything. I've been looking for a good case to set some precedent with, and this is perfect. I could have hugged him. Instead, I just shook his hand and thanked him about 15 times. David sent the letter on Monday. By Wednesday, I received a response from Patricia, not as HOA president, but apparently from her own personal attorney, a guy named Richard Walsh from some fancy firm in Phoenix. The letter was 3 pages of legal threats, accusing me of trying to undermine the HOA's authority and warning that if I continued to resist, they'd pursue additional violations and potentially put a lien on my property. David read it and laughed out loud. They hired Richard Walsh. This is beautiful. Richard's a blowhard who thinks he can intimidate everyone with fancy letterhead. He's going to hate this case so much. Is this actually serious? Can they put a lien on my house? They can try, but they'd have to win first, and they're not going to win. This is all posturing. They're hoping you'll get scared and back down. I didn't back down. David filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state, alleging improper enforcement and failure to maintain proper records. He also filed a lawsuit in Maricopa County Small Claims Court, seeking declaratory judgment that the violation was invalid and requesting reimbursement for his legal fees. The Department of Real Estate investigation happened first. An investigator named Michelle Torres came out to the neighborhood in late May, about a month after this whole mess started. She met me at my house, examined my truck, and took photos from every angle. Then she went through the neighborhood and photographed every other blue vehicle she could find. I've been doing this job for 8 years, Michelle said as she took notes. This is definitely in the top 5 most ridiculous complaints I've investigated. Your truck looks completely normal to me. That's what I keep saying. Do you mind if I keep your copy of the bylaws? I want to have our legal team review the language. Please? Take it. I've got the whole thing memorized at this point. Michelle also requested a meeting with Patricia and the HOA board, which Patricia initially refused to attend. Only after Michelle explained that non-cooperation with a state investigation could result in penalties did Patricia agree to show up. I wasn't invited to that meeting, but David got a copy of the report afterwards. According to Michelle's findings, the HOA had no written color standards, no Architectural Review Committee meeting minutes for the past 2 years, and no documentation explaining how color determinations were made. Patricia's explanation, recorded in the report, was that she knew inappropriate colors when she saw them, and didn't need written standards because she had good judgment. The Department of Real Estate issued a formal citation to the HOA for failure to maintain proper records and improper enforcement of community standards. They ordered the HOA to either establish clear, written color standards with objective criteria or cease all enforcement related to vehicle colors. They also voided my violation and any associated fines. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia responded to the citation by calling an emergency HOA meeting to amend the bylaws. She drafted a new section 7.3.2a, which specified that all vehicles must be in colors with specific paint codes from major automotive manufacturers, and she created a list of approved blue paint codes that mysteriously didn't include Ford's Velocity Blue. David got a copy of the proposed amendment and immediately filed for an injunction. She's trying to change the rules retroactively to justify her violation. That's not how this works. The small claims court hearing was scheduled for July 15th, about 3 months after I'd first gotten that orange envelope on my windshield. By that point, the whole neighborhood was talking about it. Some people thought I was being difficult and should just repaint my truck. Others thought Patricia had finally gone too far and were glad someone was standing up to her. I got a lot of anonymous notes. Some were supportive, telling me to keep fighting. Others were hostile, calling me a troublemaker and saying I was going to ruin property values by challenging the HOA. One note, written in careful cursive on cream-colored stationery, called me an embarrassment to the community and suggested I move somewhere that appreciated mediocrity. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit and met David at the courthouse. Small claims court in Maricopa County is designed to be accessible to regular people, but having a lawyer felt like bringing a gun to a knife fight. Patricia showed up with Richard Walsh and 2 other attorneys from his firm, all wearing expensive suits and carrying leather briefcases. Judge Amanda Richardson presided. She was in her 60s, with short gray hair and reading glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, according to the plaque on her desk, and she had the demeanor of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. "This is a small claims hearing regarding a homeowners association vehicle violation," Judge Richardson said, reviewing her notes. "Mr. Baxter is contesting a fine levied by the Sunset Ridge HOA for having a vehicle in an unapproved color. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," David said, "and the HOA maintains that the vehicle is in violation of community standards." Richard Walsh stood up, all 6'3" of him. "Your Honor, the Sunset Ridge HOA has clear bylaws regarding vehicle appearance. Mr. Baxter's vehicle is in violation of those bylaws, and he has refused to comply despite numerous good faith attempts to resolve the matter." "Good faith?" David said. "Your Honor, they fined my client for having a blue truck when the bylaws explicitly allow blue vehicles. They've provided no objective standard for what constitutes an approved shade. They've applied their rules inconsistently, and they've attempted to change the bylaws after the fact to justify their enforcement." Judge Richardson held up a hand. "Let's start with the basics, Mr. Walsh. Can you provide me with the written standard that defines an approved shade of blue?" Walsh pulled out a binder. "Your Honor, the Architectural Review Committee has discretion to determine what is and is not appropriate for the community's aesthetic." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you have a written standard. Paint codes, color charts, anything objective that would allow a homeowner to know in advance whether their vehicle color is acceptable." "The bylaws give the committee discretion, Your Honor." "So that's a no, Mr. Carmichael. Do you have evidence that other blue vehicles in the community have not been cited?" David pulled out my folder of photos. "Yes, Your Honor. We documented 12 other blue vehicles in various shades, none of which have received violations. We also have the report from the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which found that the HOA failed to maintain proper records and engaged in improper enforcement." Judge Richardson spent several minutes looking through the photos and reading the Department of Real Estate report. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and Walsh whispering urgently to Patricia. "Mrs. Vandermeer," the judge said finally, "you're the HOA president?" Patricia stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Can you explain to me why Mr. Baxter's vehicle was singled out when there are multiple other blue vehicles in the community? His truck is different. It's flashy and inappropriate for a residential neighborhood, but it's a standard color from a major automobile manufacturer?" "Yes, but it's not appropriate. Based on what objective standard?" Patricia hesitated. "Based on my judgment as HOA president." Your personal judgment, not any written rule or guideline. The bylaws give me discretion. Judge Richardson took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Mrs. Vandermeer, I've been hearing HOA cases for 2 decades. I've seen disputes over fence heights, tree trimming, holiday decorations, you name it. This is, without question, one of the most frivolous cases I've ever seen. Walsh stood up quickly. Your Honor, the HOA has a right to enforce community standards. They have a right to enforce clear, objective, consistently applied standards. What they don't have a right to do is arbitrarily fine homeowners based on personal aesthetic preferences with no written guidelines. Mr. Baxter had no way to know his vehicle would be considered inappropriate because there's no standard defining what's appropriate. The judge put her glasses back on and made some notes. Here's my ruling. The violation against Mr. Baxter is hereby declared invalid and void. The Sunset Ridge HOA is ordered to cease all collection activities and remove any record of the violation from Mr. Baxter's account. Additionally, the HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Baxter's legal fees, which I'm awarding in full. If the HOA wishes to enforce vehicle color standards going forward, they must first establish clear, objective, written standards that are applied consistently to all homeowners. Do you understand? Your Honor, Walsh started, but Judge Richardson cut him off. That's not a request, Mr. Walsh. That's an order. This case is dismissed. Next. We walked out of the courthouse into the July heat, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. David was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. I told you this was going to be fun, he said. Judge Richardson doesn't mess around. That was beautiful. So it's over? It's over. They have to pay my fees, which are going to be substantial since I billed every hour I spent on this case. And they can't bother you about your truck anymore. I thought that was the end of it. Again, I was wrong. 2 weeks after the court ruling, I came home from grocery shopping to find my truck's tires slashed. All 4 of them cut clean through with something sharp. There was another note on my windshield, this time typed instead of handwritten. You should have moved. I called the police. A young officer named Rodriguez came out, took a report, and examined the tires. This is pretty deliberate, he said. Someone really wanted to make a point. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I've been in a legal fight with my HOA. The president wasn't happy that I won. Rodriguez's expression changed. Patricia Vandermeer? You know her? We've had calls about her before. Nothing we could ever prove, but there've been incidents. Let me get some photos and file this report. You might want to consider getting a camera system for your driveway. The tires cost me $800 to replace. I also installed 3 security cameras covering my driveway and the front of my house. David told me to document everything and keep all the receipts. 3 days after I installed the cameras, they caught someone spray painting "Move" in huge red letters across my front door at 2 in the morning. The footage was grainy because it was dark, but I could make out a figure in a dark hoodie. I couldn't see their face, but I could see their car in the background, a white Mercedes SUV with a distinctive dent in the rear bumper. Patricia Vandermeer drove a white Mercedes SUV with a dent in the rear bumper. I'd seen it parked in front of her house a dozen times. I called Officer Rodriguez again. This time, he came with a detective, a stern-looking woman named Detective Sarah Ortiz. They watched the camera footage 3 times. That's Vandermeer's car, Rodriguez said. I recognize that dent. She backed into a fire hydrant about 6 months ago. Can we prove she's the one who did it? Detective Ortiz asked. Not from this footage. The person's wearing a hood and gloves. But we can talk to her about the car. They went to Patricia's house that afternoon. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Detective Ortiz called me afterwards to fill me in. She denied everything, Ortiz said. Claims her car was in her garage all night, says the dent is common and we can't prove it's her vehicle. But here's the thing. She got really nervous when we showed her the footage. Started talking about how you've been harassing her, how the court ruling was unfair, how you're ruining the neighborhood. So what happens now? We're going to keep investigating. In the meantime, keep your cameras running and don't engage with her. If anything else happens, call us immediately. 2 weeks of peace followed. I started to relax, thinking maybe Patricia had gotten scared by the police visit. Then I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a brick through my living room window. The brick had a note tied to it with string. Last warning. This time, the cameras caught everything. Same figure, same hoodie, but this time they parked under a streetlight, and I could see the license plate clearly. It was Patricia's car. Even better, when the person threw the brick, their hood fell back for just a second. and the streetlight illuminated Patricia's face, twisted with rage. I called 911. Rodriguez and Ortiz showed up with 2 other officers. I showed them the footage, and Ortiz made a call to the prosecutor's office right there in my living room. "We've got her," Ortiz said. "Criminal damage, harassment, possibly stalking depending on how the DA wants to charge it. This is enough for an arrest." They arrested Patricia Vandermeer at 6:30 in the morning. I wasn't there, but my neighbor Marcus texted me a photo of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, still wearing her silk pajamas, screaming about persecution and how I'd destroyed the neighborhood. The arrest made the local news. Not the major stations, but the community blog and the Scottsdale Independent both ran stories about the HOA president who'd been arrested for vandalizing a homeowner's property following a dispute over truck color. The headline in the Independent read, "HOA president arrested after court loss in vehicle color dispute." The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Gerald Thompson, the treasurer who tried to help me during that first hearing, became interim president. He called me personally to apologize. "I should have pushed back harder when this started," Gerald said. Patricia had gotten so out of control, but she'd been president for so long that we all just kind of let her do whatever she wanted. "I'm sorry you had to go through all this over a truck. I appreciate that. What happens to the HOA now?" "We're going to do a full review of all the bylaws, make sure everything has clear, objective standards. We're also going to hire a professional management company to handle enforcement so we don't have situations like this again. And for what it's worth, your truck looks completely fine to me. I never understood what Patricia's problem was." Patricia's trial happened in October, about 6 months after this whole nightmare started. She pleaded no contest to criminal damage and harassment charges as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution for my tires, window, and door repair, required to complete anger management classes, and permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The judge, a different one from my small claims case, spent about 5 minutes lecturing Patricia about abuse of power and the responsibilities of community leadership. Patricia stood there, stone-faced through the whole thing, but I saw her hands shaking. David attended the sentencing with me. As we left the courthouse, he put a hand on my shoulder. "So, did you ever think your truck would lead to all this?" "Not in a million years. I just wanted a nice blue truck." "Well, you've got your truck. You've got justice, and you've set precedent that's going to help a lot of other homeowners dealing with overzealous HOAs. I'd call that a win." The Sunset Ridge HOA hired a management company called Arizona Community Services in November. They did exactly what Gerald promised, going through every bylaw and creating clear, objective standards with measurable criteria. The new vehicle color policy included specific paint codes from all major manufacturers, including Ford's Velocity Blue, and applied to all homeowners equally. Gerald served out the rest of Patricia's term as president and then stepped down. A younger couple, both of them engineers who believed in evidence-based decision-making, ran for president and vice president and won in a landslide. The HOA went from being the neighborhood nightmare to being actually functional. I still live in the same house on Saguaro Lane. My truck, still Velocity Blue, still parks in my driveway every single day. I added a custom license plate frame that says "Approved Blue" as a little inside joke, and Marcus thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever seen. Patricia moved away about a year after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she relocated to somewhere in Nevada, which I'm sure has HOAs that will eventually learn to regret her presence. Gerald told me she tried to sue me civilly for defamation and emotional distress, but her lawyer apparently took one look at the facts and refused to file the case. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, even when something seems too small or silly to fight over. David told me that most HOA abuse goes unchallenged because people don't want the hassle, don't think they can win, or are afraid of retaliation. But arbitrary authority without accountability just gets worse over time, and someone has to be willing to push back. My story ended up being cited in a few Arizona legal blogs and HOA reform websites. David gave a presentation about it at a real estate law conference, with my permission, titled "The Dumbest Case Ever, a Study in HOA Overreach." He said it got the biggest laughs of the whole conference, but also sparked some serious discussions about how HOAs are regulated and what protections homeowners need. The cameras I installed stayed up, not because I'm worried about retaliation anymore, but because they're actually pretty useful. I caught the neighborhood package thief on camera last year and helped the police make an arrest. I also have great footage of the family of quail that crosses my yard every morning, which my mom loves when I send her the videos. Marcus and I finally took that camping trip with my truck, driving up to Flagstaff for a long weekend of hiking and sitting around campfires. He made jokes the entire time about how my controversial blue truck was ruining the wilderness aesthetic. I told him if he didn't shut up, I was leaving him in the woods. The legal fees that the HOA was ordered to pay came out to just over $40,000. That was money that would have gone to neighborhood improvements, and some people in the community were upset about it. But as Gerald pointed out in a neighborhood meeting, that money was spent because Patricia chose to fight an unwinnable battle over her personal aesthetic preferences rather than following proper procedures. It was an expensive lesson in why HOA boards need to follow the rules. I framed the court order and hung it in my garage, right above where I parked the truck. It's a reminder that sometimes the most absurd situations require the most serious responses, and that standing up for yourself, even over something as silly as the shade of blue on a pickup truck, matters. The Arizona Department of Real Estate ended up using my case as a training example for new HOA boards about the importance of clear standards and proper documentation. I got a thank you call from Michelle Torres, the investigator who'd helped me, telling me that several other homeowners had successfully challenged improper violations by citing my case as precedent. David and I became good friends through the whole process. We grab lunch about once a month, and he always insists on buying because he says my case was the most fun he'd had in years. He tells all his lawyer friends about it at parties. I once defended a guy's right to own a blue truck he'll start, and people always think he's joking until he shows them the court documents. The note that was tied to the brick that came through my window ended up being traced back to stationery that Patricia had special ordered from a boutique shop in Scottsdale. The shop owner remembered her because Patricia had been rude about the texture of the paper and demanded a discount. That little detail wasn't needed for the conviction, but Detective Ortiz told me it was satisfying to have that extra confirmation. I ended up testifying before the Arizona State Legislature when they were considering reforms to HOA regulations. A representative from Tempe had heard about my case and invited me to share my experience during a committee hearing. I sat at a table in front of a bunch of politicians and told them about getting fined for having the wrong shade of blue truck. A few of them laughed at first, thinking it was too ridiculous to be true, but then they saw the documentation and realized how broken the system was. That testimony helped contribute to a new law requiring all Arizona HOAs to maintain publicly accessible databases of their architectural standards with clear criteria that homeowners could reference before making decisions. The law passed unanimously, and the representative who'd invited me to testify sent me a signed copy of the bill. Susan Chen, the HOA secretary who'd suggested tabling my case during that first hearing, apologized to me personally about 6 months after everything ended. We ran into each other at the grocery store, and she stopped me in the produce section. "I should have spoken up more," Susan said. "I knew what Patricia was doing was wrong, but I didn't want to cause trouble. I'm sorry you had to fight that battle alone." "You did speak up," I reminded her. "You suggested reviewing the standards. That was more than anyone else on that board did. Still, I've learned a lot from watching how you handled everything. You didn't back down even when it would have been easier, and you were right." Susan ended up running for the HOA board after the new elections and won a seat. She pushed for transparency measures and regular homeowner feedback sessions. The HOA board meetings went from being rubber stamp sessions for Patricia's decrees to actual productive discussions about community issues. My brother thought the whole thing was hilarious and told everyone in his office about it. He works for a marketing firm in Denver, and apparently, my brother got sued by his HOA over the wrong shade of blue, became his go-to icebreaker story. He offered to buy me a paint job for my birthday as a joke. I told him where he could stick his paint job. The house across the street from me went up for sale about 8 months after Patricia's arrest. A young couple from California bought it, and when they were doing their due diligence, they found articles about the HOA drama online. They almost backed out of the purchase, worried that the HOA was toxic. I talked to them personally, explained what had happened and how things had changed, and showed them the new bylaws and management structure. They ended up buying the house, and we became friendly neighbors. Every so often, someone new moves into the neighborhood and asks about the story. Marcus has taken to telling an increasingly exaggerated version where Patricia tried to have my truck towed in the middle of the night, and I chased her through the streets in a dramatic car chase. I have to correct him every time, but his version is definitely more entertaining than the reality of legal filings and court hearings. The Scottsdale Independent did a follow-up article a year after the case ended, looking at how the neighborhood had changed. They interviewed several homeowners, Gerald, David, and me. The article was titled, "How One Blue Truck Reformed a HOA," and it focused on the positive changes that had come from challenging Patricia's authority. Property values in the neighborhood actually went up because people were less afraid of arbitrary enforcement and saw the HOA as functional instead of adversarial. I still drive that truck every day. It's got a few dings and scratches now, some dust in the bed from camping trips and hardware store runs, but it's still that same Velocity blue that started this whole mess. Sometimes I'll be sitting at a red light and notice someone looking at it, and I wonder if they're thinking nice truck or wrong shade of blue. I've learned that you can't please everyone, and trying to do so will make you miserable. David used the money from his legal fees to take his family on a vacation to Hawaii. He sent me a postcard of a blue ocean with the caption, "Is this an approved shade of blue?" His wife thinks he's a dork, but she appreciated the vacation. The most satisfying moment came about 18 months after everything ended. I was washing my truck in my driveway on a Saturday morning when Gerald walked by with his dog. He stopped to chat, and we talked about the upcoming budget meeting and some landscaping improvements the HOA was planning. "You know what's funny?" Gerald said. "Nobody talks about vehicle colors anymore. We've had people park everything from a bright red Corvette to a purple Jeep in their driveways, and nobody cares. Turns out when you're not being policed on every little detail, people are pretty reasonable about what they park in front of their houses." "Imagine that," I said, spraying soap off the hood. Patricia was so convinced that without strict enforcement, the neighborhood would turn into a junkyard. But all that strict enforcement did was make everyone miserable and waste a bunch of money on legal fees. Funny how that works. I thought about that conversation a lot afterwards. The whole ordeal had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the system needs someone to stand up and say, "This is wrong," before things can change. I didn't set out to be that person. I just wanted to keep my blue truck, but I'm glad I didn't back down. The quail family that crosses my yard has gotten used to me and my truck. They don't scatter anymore when I start the engine in the morning. There's something peaceful about watching them march across the driveway in their little line, completely unconcerned with the color of the vehicle parked there. I wish more people could have that attitude. Last month, I got a call from a homeowner in Mesa who'd read about my case online. She was being fined by her HOA for having a vegetable garden in her front yard, even though nothing in the bylaws prohibited gardens. She wanted to know if David would take her case. I gave her David's number and told her to mention my name. He called me later that day laughing. "I'm going to end up as the go-to lawyer for ridiculous HOA cases because of you." "You're welcome. Are you going to help her?" "Of course I am. Someone's got to keep these HOAs honest. Plus, these cases are way more interesting than drafting contracts all day." That vegetable garden case ended up settling out of court, with the HOA agreeing to update their landscaping rules to explicitly allow gardens and paying the homeowners legal fees. David sent me a photo of the garden after it was all resolved. It was beautiful, full of tomatoes and peppers and squash, completely reasonable and not at all a threat to anyone's property values. I've learned that HOAs serve an important function when they're run properly. They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and help preserve property values, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants who enjoy wielding power over their neighbors, and when that happens, someone needs to push back. The system only works if there's accountability. My truck is coming up on 4 years old now. The Velocity Blue has held up well, still shining in the Arizona sun, still parked in my driveway every single day. I've never regretted buying it, not even through all the drama it caused. If anything, I love it more now because it represents refusing to be bullied, standing up for what's right even when it's inconvenient, and trusting that the system can work if you're willing to fight for it. Every time I climb into the driver's seat and see that blue dashboard, those blue door panels, that blue steering wheel, I remember Judge Richardson looking over her glasses at Patricia and declaring this one of the most frivolous cases she'd ever seen. I remember David calling it the dumbest case ever with genuine delight in his voice. I remember Detective Ortiz showing me the camera footage of Patricia's face when her hood fell back, caught red-handed in her harassment campaign. But mostly, I remember that moment sitting in the courthouse parking lot after winning the small claims case, feeling the sun on my face through the windshield of my supposedly inappropriate truck, knowing that I'd done the right thing by not backing down. That feeling was worth every dollar, every hour of stress, every uncomfortable moment of the past few months. Stephen Baxter, software engineer, owner of a Velocity Blue Ford F-150, winner of the dumbest case ever. That's me. And I wouldn't change a thing.